Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Combat Chronicles. This episode is going to discuss UFC 292, which has the main event between Aljamain Sterling and the contender Sean O'Malley for the Bantamweight title. But before we get to that fight, I want to discuss some of the other very interesting fights on the card. And this card is going to have quite an impact on the bantamweight division, not just because of the main event on the card, but also because of the other bantamweight fights that are on this card. So let's get started with the first fight on the card, which is between Chito Vera and Pedro Munoz. Now, if you go to the tail of the tape, there are a few surprises here, because one would expect Pedro Munoz to be the more experienced fighter if we go by the general perception. But the fact of the matter is that Chito Vera has a record of 20 wins, 8 losses and 1 draw, against Pedro Munoz's record of 20 wins, 7 losses and 2 no contests. So when it comes to experience, they are not very far off. They are equally experienced, and that is something that we do not realize in general unless we look at the record. If you look at the average fight time, there is another little surprise here, because one would expect Chito Vera to have a lower average fight time because he is a knockout artist and he is very powerful with his strikes. But Chito has an average fight time of 12 minutes 48 seconds against Pedro Munoz's average fight time of 10 minutes 54 seconds. And this has a lot to do with the fact that Chito takes his time in fights and he doesn't have a very high output in his fights. So he doesn't strike at a very high rate. Even though he is known as a striker, that is not his forte. His forte is hitting people really hard and knocking them out. So yeah, this is another idiosyncrasy that is revealed in the tail of the tape. Now if you look at their physiques, Chito Vera stands 5 feet 8 inches tall against Pedro Munoz, who is 5 feet 6 inches. So he has a 2-inch reach advantage, which is not very significant. What is significant though is that he has a 5-inch reach advantage because he has a 70-inch reach against Munoz's 65-inch reach. So if we consider the fact that Chito is a far better, far more unconventional striker, in my opinion at the very least, Pedro Munoz has not just a disadvantage in the striking style that he presents, but also in the fact that he has a reach disadvantage, which will make it hard for him to get inside and attack Chito effectively. Now, both of these fighters are contradictory in the way they approach a fight, and Pedro Munoz has a very traditional old school style of fighting. He uses a lot of punches and kicks, yes, but he has a very traditional stance. He stands orthodox and he keeps his hands up. He uses very conventional, technically crisp strikes, but he doesn't have anything that can surprise the opponent. So he will be a little predictable for somebody who's at the level of Chito Vera when it comes to striking. Chito, on the other hand, switches stances seamlessly, so he can switch from orthodox to southpaw, and that is something that will help him in this fight a lot. Now, a few of the things that we need to focus on to understand how this fight is going to progress, especially in Chito's case, are the fact that he, like I said, has a very unconventional Muay Thai based Far East kind of style of fighting, striking, but he has added some things to it to make it a very effective style overall. So he has a very well-rounded style of striking, and to top that off, Chito has excellent power in his strikes. In fact, if you go back to his fight against Dominic Cruz, you will see one of the most beautiful knockouts that you can ever see in the UFC, because he literally just went through the fight taking a lot of hits but not laying more damage on Dominic Cruz than he had taken. But if you look at the scorecard of that fight up till the point where Dominic Cruz got knocked out, you would realize that Dominic Cruz was winning the fight on points. Yet Chito was laying more damage on him, and with one head kick he completely took Dominic Cruz out of the fight. In fact, you saw him collapse like a building falling to the ground, and it was quite impressive. It was a very impressive sight to see. Anyway, the issue with Chito Vera is that he does not fight at a very good pace. So he does not give a lot of output in his fights, and he fights at a very slow pace. But he has very, very vicious shots. So every kick, every knee, every elbow, every punch is meant to either knock you out or at least break something in you or put a lot of damage on you, which over the course of a fight can, it can become a snowball effect, and the other fighter eventually ends up taking on so much damage that he cannot do very, very well in the fight because of all the damage he's taken. And like I said, his elbows and knees are excellent. So Pedro Munoz will have to make sure that he doesn't go headfirst into a takedown attempt, because Chito Vera will bring a knee up the middle and knock him out in an instant. And he has to be careful in the clinch, because Chito, when he is up close to his opponent, always uses his elbows very, very efficiently. And because he has that Muay Thai style, he has excellent elbows that come from that school of fighting. Chito is also a good grappler, especially defensively, but he does not initiate too much grappling. So most of his grappling is geared towards keeping him safe when somebody else tries to grapple him. And yes, as I mentioned before, Chito is a very technical, very slick, very crafty striker who has very mean, crisp strikes. So yeah, it is quite a scary proposition to fight against Chito, because it feels like he is exercising his demons on you by hitting you really, really hard, and that he has a mean streak that is hard to compare to other fighters, especially in the bantamweight division. If you look at Pedro Munoz, like I said, he has a very traditional old school fight style, which makes him a little predictable. But he has heavy, strong leg kicks, which he should be using in this fight to neutralize Chito's front leg. So whichever leg Chito is leaning forward with, or whichever leg he is putting up front, Pedro Munoz should be attacking that leg, because he has excellent leg kicks, and that will, number one, take a little bit of power out of Chito's shots, because he will not have a good base to lean on. And number two, it will make his jab a little weaker, because he won't be able to step forward on that foot and put power into his jab. Plus, it will take Chito's mobility away, so it will help Pedro Munoz bridge the gap in their striking capabilities. Then Pedro Munoz has very good neck attacks in grappling, so that is something Chito has to be careful of, because if Chito presents his neck to Pedro Munoz, Munoz will grab it and probably choke him out, which is not something that Chito wants. Although Chito has the ability to use his jiu-jitsu to mitigate that. So yeah, I don't think that should be too much of an issue. Another thing that is an issue with Pedro Munoz is that he has a very conventional stance, so it is very predictable, and his strikes are very easy to read because of that stance and his fight style. And against a fighter like Chito Vera, who is a very intelligent striker and uses setups quite well, it might not be a good idea to approach him with the same the same fight style or the same strikes or the same attacks over and over again, because he will read those patterns and then set something up that will damage Pedro Munoz. If you go into the striking, so ironically, Chito has 4.09 strikes per minute landed at an average against Pedro Munoz's 5.30. So this is another thing. Even though Pedro Munoz is supposed to be the less accomplished striker, Chito does not strike at a very high rate. So Pedro can, if he manages to do it, he can put a lot of output and put Chito in a place where he loses out on points, which is what happened with him in his last fight against Corey Sandhagen. And that is what took Chito down from the number one spot, I think, because he was supposed to be the next guy to fight for the championship. And it was between him and Corey Sandhagen, and Corey Sandhagen just beat him because he had more output and he won on points. Striking accuracy wise, Chito has a 49% accuracy against Munoz's 43%, and that is because he is very considerate with his shots. So because he doesn't put too much shots out, he generally makes sure that his shots are worth more, they do much more damage and they're more accurate. Strikes absorbed wise, they're almost neck and neck. Chito has a 5.02 strikes absorbed per minute average, and Pedro Munoz has a 5.90 strikes per minute average. So my choice for this fight without going into too many other details, is going to be Chito Vera, because I think he will bring a little more output into this fight because he has experienced what that can do to his fighting style and how it can affect a fight against him when he fought Sandhagen in his last fight. So I think he's going to bring more output into this fight and add it to his power, his unconventional striking, his very, very strong shots. I think he will manage to knock Pedro Munoz out, or at the very least damage him badly if the fight goes all 3 rounds. Now I'm going to skip the next fight, which is another bantamweight fight between Blackshear and Mario Bautista, because I don't really want to get into that fight. But we are going to go on to the Neil Magny versus Ian Garry fight. So initially Ian Machado Garry was supposed to fight Geoff Neal, but because Geoff Neal dropped out of the fight, Neil Magny has taken up this fight on short notice, and this is actually bad news for Ian Garry because Neil Magny is a far more accomplished and well-rounded fighter. The reason why people are so interested in this fight is because Ian Garry is undefeated, even though he has a very small career to speak of. So he's only had 12 fights, but he's won all 12 of those fights. Whereas Neil Magny has a record of 28 wins, 11 losses and 0 no contests or draws. So Neil Magny is so experienced that he has more than twice as many wins as Ian Garry does, and he has a lot many more fights. So he is going to bring all of that experience into this fight. And Neil Magny is not exactly somebody who's not a good striker or a good wrestler, although I think in this particular fight his wrestling will be the standout, because number one, he is a better wrestler than he is a striker, and secondly, Ian Garry is not known for his wrestling or jiu-jitsu. That is the chink in his armor, and that is something that Neil Magny might want to exploit. If you look at their height, so generally Ian Garry is supposed to be the taller, lankier fighter, but in this particular case, not only does he lose out in that regard, he also loses out in reach. So their heights are even. There is no difference between their heights. They're both 6'3", and when it comes to the reach, Neil Magny has an 80-inch reach and he has a 6-inch advantage over Ian Garry. So all of those physical attributes that Ian Garry is used to taking into a fight against his opponents are nullified here. They're both orthodox fighters, so there isn't much to speak of in that regard. If you look at the striking though, like I said, Ian Garry is the more accomplished or the more unconventional striker, or the flashiest striker, if you would like to say that. But Neil Magny is also a good striker. Anyway, Neil Magny has a strikes landed per minute average of 3.52 against Ian Garry's 6.83. So that is a huge difference, and you see from right there that Magny does not give as much output in a fight as Ian Garry does, because Ian Garry is purely striking and he generally has a high output. Striking accuracy wise, Magny has a 46% accuracy against Garry's 55%. Strikes absorbed per minute wise, Magny absorbs 2.25 because he goes to the ground as well, where he doesn't absorb as many strikes, whereas Machado Garry absorbs about 4.09 strikes per minute. So because he stays standing up and he strikes as much as he does, he takes a few hits as well. Defense wise, both of them have a similar striking defense. Neil Magny is at 54%, Ian Garry is at 53%. But we can see that Ian Garry has a striking advantage because he is more technical and he is more flamboyant in that regard. In the grappling department though, the script completely flips, because Neil Magny has a takedown average per 15 minutes of 2.30 against Ian Garry's 0.29. So he has nothing to speak of there. Long story short, Neil Magny should take this fight to the ground and he should keep it there, because the striking is going to be better suited. The striking realm is better suited for Ian Garry. If Ian Garry wants to win this fight, he has to keep the fight on the feet, because if Neil Magny manages to take him down willy-nilly, then he is not going to have a very good time, and Magny will destroy him if they're playing the ground game. A few things to keep in mind are the fact that Ian Garry, like I said, lacks grappling credentials, so he's not a very, very good grappler. Although he has been working on his jiu-jitsu now, so we will see if that helps him in this fight. Even if he has jiu-jitsu to put into this fight and defend himself, that is not a good position to be in, where you're on your back and Neil Magny is on top of you controlling you, because you cannot get good enough if you're Ian Garry to make sure that your jiu-jitsu nullifies Neil Magny's grappling. And if you speak of Neil Magny, he has excellent power in his strikes and he is a good striker as well. So it is not like Ian Garry is going to have a nice time striking with him, but since he has more output, that is where he has the advantage. And Neil Magny also has very good jiu-jitsu chokes, so neck cranks, neck chokes, those are his forte. So that is something that Ian Garry will have to be careful of, and he'll have to use his new abilities in jiu-jitsu to protect against that. Another thing that Neil Magny brings to the table is that he has very good transitions from the clinch. So when he breaks away from a clinch, he's very good at using that space or using that time to initiate a grappling exchange and take his opponent down, or even use strikes when he's breaking away from a clinch. So he can do very, very well if the fight goes into a clinch game. My pick for this fight, well, technically speaking, I would say this fight would go to Neil Magny because he is the more accomplished fighter. But since he is taking this fight on short notice, I don't know if he will be well prepared for this fight, and how much he has worked on his gas tank and how much he has worked on his techniques when it comes to getting them ready for Ian Garry specifically. So I'm going to go against the conventional wisdom, and I'm going to say that Ian Garry is likely to win this fight. But I do know that if Neil Magny repeatedly takes Ian Garry down, then Neil Magny is going to win this fight. So yeah, if you're betting on this fight, do it at your own risk. I would go with Ian Machado Garry because he has more momentum and he has the striking locked in. So yeah, he might knock him out. The next fight I want to talk about is the co-main event on this card between the women's strawweight champion Zhang Weili and the number one contender Amanda Lemos, who are both very, very, very accomplished knockout artists and excellent fighters. Amanda Lemos more so than Zhang Weili, in my opinion, because I think her power is a little more, brilliant. The way she knocks people out is actually quite fun to watch because you can see the light go off in their eyes, and that's actually fascinating, especially for a woman who stands 5'4" tall. That's an exceptional amount of power. Anyway, if you look at the tail of the tape, Zhang Weili has a lot more experience and she has fought a better class of fighters, especially if you go by the last 5 or 6 fights, because she's fought Rose Namajunas twice. She lost her belt to Rose, so she is an ex-champion who lost her belt to Rose Namajunas and then went on to beat Carla Esparza to win the belt back, which is kind of funny, but we're not going to get into those details. Anyway, she has a record of 23 wins, 3 losses and 0 draws or no contests against Amanda Lemos's 13 wins, 2 losses and 1 draw. So she has a lot more experience, yes, and she also has a higher average fight time in the octagon. So she spent a lot more time per fight in the octagon. She spent around 11.02 minutes in the octagon per fight at an average against Amanda Lemos's 7.25, because Lemos is a knockout artist and she doesn't wait around for the fight to progress. She tries to take everybody out in the first or the second round, and that is where her forte lies. Height wise, they're both 5'4", and reach wise, Amanda Lemos has a 2-inch reach advantage, which is not very significant. Now, Lemos is a southpaw fighter and Zhang Weili switches stances. She can fight from southpaw or orthodox, so that is going to help her, because generally fighting against a southpaw fighter is difficult for orthodox fighters because they're not used to it as much. Now, if you go to the striking, this is where the fight is going to be at its deadliest. Now, Zhang Weili has a 5.79 strikes landed per minute average against Amanda Lemos's 4.51, which is not very, very far off. But Amanda Lemos is a little more conservative with her strikes because she hits very, very hard and she kind of leans into her strikes a lot. a few of the things that I want to talk about, which are important for this fight, especially in the case of Zhang Weili, are the fact that she also has excellent striking and very, very good power, and the fact that she is a good grappler and a wrestler as well, which is something that I think Amanda Lemos lacks. Well, she is reasonable in those regards, but she's not as good as Zhang is. So that might be something she has to be careful of, because she might not want to go to the ground with Zhang Weili. One thing about Zhang Weili though is that she has the capability to give a good output in a fight, and Amanda Lemos might not be able to match that output, because Zhang can go above her normal average output and she has the capability to put on that pace. That is not something that we know whether Amanda Lemos is capable of or not. And yeah, Zhang has an experience advantage. She has a very diverse skill set, so she's not purely a striker or a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner or a wrestler. She is a very good mix of all of those things. The one thing that she needs to be careful of though is Amanda Lemos's power, especially because in her first stint as the champion, she had this bad habit of not taking her opponents as seriously, because she would focus on what she can do and what she can show in a fight, but she would forget about what the opponent brings to the table, which is kind of why she went into the fight with Rose a little too overconfident and ended up getting knocked out, because she didn't expect Rose Namajunas to head kick her and just take her out of the fight. And then in the second fight, she was prepared for the striking, and Rose took her down to the ground and dominated her on the ground, which is something that nobody expected. So yeah, Zhang has to be careful of what is coming at her and not be overconfident in the fight. If you look at Amanda Lemos, she also has excellent power, and her power is far more explosive than Zhang Weili's, in my opinion, if we go by the eye test. And she has better striking accuracy. So if we go to the striking accuracy, she has a 57% accuracy against Zhang Weili's 47%. And that is because she is more considerate with her strikes, and she lands her strikes with a lot more purpose. So some of the strikes are not just there to fill in the gaps. All of those strikes are meant to damage you. The issue though is that she can't match Zhang Weili's grappling, like I said before. But she is very calculative, especially in the striking department, and if she can keep the fight on her feet, then she might be able to deal with Zhang well. The issue though another issue is that Amanda Lemos always looks for power, and she always looks to land these strong big shots, which makes her overextend sometimes and get off balance. And because Zhang has excellent footwork, she will be able to use that against Amanda and change her stance or use her footwork to get in the right position while Amanda is overextended, and that is the perfect position to strike somebody from, and that is where most knockouts happen. So Amanda Lemos has to be careful that she does not overextend when she's striking, and she shouldn't be going into this fight looking for those power shots. She should just let them flow. The one thing though, despite the fact that Amanda's grappling is not excellent, one thing that I will say is that she's very good in grappling transitions. So she's very good at transitions from the clinch, and she's very good in transitions where a scramble takes place. So mid grappling, when a grappling exchange is initiated and you're going from the takedown to the grappling exchange, those periods are where Amanda Lemos is very, very good, and she's good at changing her balance in the right way to get out of those exchanges or bring them into her advantage. So yeah, that is something Zhang might want to be careful of, because it could be a repeat of Rose Namajunas just getting on top of her and controlling her. Although I think Zhang has worked a lot more on her grappling, so she should be fine. Now we go to the main event on this card, which is between Aljamain Sterling and Sean O'Malley. Now, full disclosure, I am not very fond of Aljamain Sterling, but I am not going to be biased, so I'm going to present the facts as they are. If you look at the tail of the tape, Sean O'Malley is far less experienced than Aljamain Sterling, who has 23 wins, 3 losses and 0 draws. Sean O'Malley has 16 wins, 1 loss and 1 no contest, and that no contest is when Chito Vera broke his ankle. So yeah, that was a very interesting fight, and Yeah, I'm not going to get into those details though. Average fight time wise, Aljamain Sterling has an average fight time of 13 minutes 36 seconds against Sean O'Malley's 9 minutes, because Sean O'Malley is a knockout artist and an excellent striker. So he doesn't go into the deep ends of most of his fights. In fact, the last fight I remember him going to the 5th round in was against Piotr Jan, which I think was his last fight. So yeah, he's not used to going 5 rounders, and he is not used to finishing those fights. He wants to knock people out quickly and get it over with, which is not something that Aljamain Sterling is known for or interested in, because he will want to drag the fight out and use his grappling and wrestling against O'Malley, who is not an excellent wrestler. And even though he's been working on his jiu-jitsu, I don't think he's going to beat Aljamain Sterling in that department either. Their heights are quite different. So Aljamain Sterling is 5'7" and Sean O'Malley is 5'11", so he has a huge height advantage. But funnily enough, he only has a 1-inch reach advantage over Sterling. So yeah, he does not have a reach advantage, and that is something that he might not be used to. So it is quite likely that Aljamain Sterling might be able to hit him in places where Sean O'Malley thinks he's safe and out of reach. Sean O'Malley switches stances very, very well, so he can fight from either stance. Aljamain Sterling, on the other hand, is an orthodox fighter purely, so that might be something that Sean O'Malley can prepare for very, very well, because he's known for preparing for fights, compared to Aljamain Sterling, who is more of a look-see-do fighter, and he does not go with a stringent game plan into a fight. He does what suits him in the moment, and that might be something that might come back to haunt him in this fight. Some of the things that we need to think about when this fight happens, especially in the case of Sterling, are the fact that he has excellent grappling and submissions, so he will want to take this fight to the ground and stay away from Sean O'Malley's striking, because Sean O'Malley is an excellent striker and he uses his reach and height very, very well. O'Malley has 11 knockouts and has excellent power. So out of his 16 wins, 11 of them are knockouts, and he is, like I said about Lemos, he is known for that explosive power, because he is very long and lanky, and he uses that length and leverage to whip his punches and land with immense power. In the case of Sterling, he sets a very high pace, especially in the grappling department, and he has excellent cardio. Now, Sean O'Malley might be able to match that pace in the striking, but he will not be able to do so in the grappling. So if this fight goes to the ground, Sean O'Malley is going to lose a lot of his stamina there, and that might destroy him completely, even in the first or the second round. While Sterling has an experience advantage, and he is an ex-Division 3 American wrestler, what he lacks is in his striking, where he strikes in a very unconventional way, but he does not employ a lot of feints, which is something that Sean O'Malley does a lot. Sean O'Malley feints and sets up shots very, very well. So yeah, that is something Aljamain Sterling has to look out for, because if he keeps biting on feints, his sensory system is going to get overloaded, and all of a sudden he won't have the energy to respond to the actual strikes coming his way. But the one thing about Aljamain Sterling striking is that, like I said, it's very unconventional. So there are times when Sterling dips down and you think he is going to go for a takedown, but he's only using that to build leverage for his punches, and all of a sudden, while you are protecting a takedown, you get hit in the face. So that is something Sean O'Malley will have to be careful of, because Sterling's striking, as much as it is limited against Sean O'Malley's, is still very unconventional and very unique. The one thing that Aljamain Sterling does have in this department, in this fight though, is that he has a decided strength advantage, which he can use for his grappling, because Sean O'Malley is not physically large or very, very strong. He has a lot of height, but he is very slim, he is very lanky. He does not bring a lot of muscle into a fight, and that is something that Aljamain Sterling can use to his advantage, because he might be able to bully Sean O'Malley in the grappling. Aljamain Sterling has 8 submissions and 5 of them are by rear naked choke, and the one thing about Aljamain Sterling that everybody knows is that you do not want him to take your back. Even if you go to the ground against him, do not let him get on your back, because if you let him get on your back, Sterling will either choke you out with a rear naked choke in that very round, or you will lose that round and end up in very bad shape for the next round. So yeah, the one thing that you need to do if you're Sean O'Malley is make sure he does not get on your back. Do not give him your back. Do not turn around and try to get up and let him climb on top of you and backpack you, because that will destroy you or end the fight in that very round. The one thing about Aljamain Sterling though is, even though he has good conditioning and he sets a very high pace, his pace management is not very good, because there are certain rounds where he expends so much energy that he has to take a slight break in the next round and his output drops. And that is something he cannot do with Sean O'Malley, because every round is going to start on the feet, and if there is a drop off in output from Sterling, Sean O'Malley will use that to put out a lot of damage and strike him, and he can very easily knock Sterling out if he's not careful. A few things about Sean O'Malley that I want to point out are the fact that he has very good range management. So Sean O'Malley is very good at making sure that he can strike and go into range when he needs to, but come out of range when he needs to, and that makes him a very frustrating fighter to stand on the feet against and fight with. Another thing about him is that he has very good counters. So that is something that Aljamain Sterling will have to be careful of. Aljamain Sterling can't just jump at him and try and take him down, because Sean O'Malley will read him and plant a counter on him, and he will be prepared for that. So yeah, he has to be careful about Sean O'Malley's counters. The one thing that I will say about Sean O'Malley is that he needs to stay up and strike. So he cannot go down to the ground with Aljamain Sterling, and he needs to make sure that his takedown defense for this fight is improved, because if he comes into this fight with the same skill set that he went into the last few fights with, he will get taken down and Aljamain Sterling will not let him get up again, because that is what he does. And the last thing about Sean O'Malley that I want to mention is the fact that he has very good pattern recognition. So if you're Aljamain Sterling, you should take this fight to the ground, because the longer you are on your feet against Sean O'Malley with your limited striking arsenal, he is going to start reading everything that you do, and all of a sudden you will not be able to surprise him, you will not be able to hit him, and he will know exactly what to do, how to counter every strike, where you are in a bad position and he can strike you. And then yeah, if you're still standing there against him, you are dead in the water, you're going to get killed. So yeah, if you're Aljamain Sterling, take it to the ground. If you're Sean O'Malley, don't let it go to the ground. Now I like Sean O'Malley as a fighter, although there are certain things I do not appreciate about his attitude and how much he whines. But especially when he's going up against Sterling, who I absolutely hate, I would love to see Sean O'Malley win this fight. But having said that, I do not think he will be able to improve his wrestling defense as much as he needs to, and Aljamain Sterling will take him down and break him down. So this is going to be a war of wills. If Sean O'Malley can hit him well enough in the beginning of every round where he is on his feet, and if he can use at least half of the rounds, so the first half of every round, to stay on the feet and strike with Aljamain Sterling, then at some point he might manage to knock him out. But if in every round after the first few seconds or the first minute, if he's getting taken down, then Aljamain Sterling is going to destroy him. So yeah, if you're betting money, I would pick Aljamain Sterling, but I really want Sean O'Malley to win this fight. Anyway, that was my piece. Please comment and let me know what you think about these fights and this event, and let me know if you want to add something that I might have missed. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, and I will see you next time with another breakdown of the next event. Thank you.